Scooby-Doo. It's a franchise that's been running for 50 years and one you're probably familiar with. If you aren't, where have you been? It began in 1969 with Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? And since then it's been a titan in animation. It's had its ups and downs, yes, but it's still here. With the new show out, a theatrically released animated movie on the way, and currently 33 direct-to-DVD movies, the gang aren't leaving us anytime soon. Speaking of those direct-to-DVD movies, let's talk about a personal favorite of mine, Scooby-Doo Camp Scare. It's not as well remembered as Zombie Island or Ghoul School, but I think it's special. Why? Well, it's simple. It's an animated slasher. But I hear you, viewer. You're wondering why. Why does that matter? We've had more horrific Scooby-Doo installments before. There's Zombie Island, the Scooby-Doo Project, and Mystery Incorporated. Recently, we got Scooby-Doo Apocalypse and Scooby-Natural. So what makes this so special? Well, let me pose you a question. In how many Scooby-Doo stories do they face off against a serial killer? The answer, of course, is not many. The closest thing I can think of is the Headless Horseman scene in The Goblin King. But that's a magical entity, not a real person. There's also the Black Samurai from the Samurai Sword, but he was portrayed as a magic swordsman. So usually, it's just simple hijinks. A monster appears, the gang's called in, they come across the monster several times in wacky situations, usually Shaggy and Scooby will disguise themselves in some way to mess with the monster, and they trap them without fail. Well, Scooby-Doo and Shaggy mess the trap up, and that leads to the case's success. The monster's trapped, the criminal revealed, and the case closed. Camp Scare does have some of these elements, but they're turned on their head, since the film seems more inspired by camp slashers like Friday the 13th. The monster opening appearance is much longer in the film than regular Scooby-Doo stories. We open to a campfire and a camp counselor is telling the tale of the woodsman.
The story I'm about to tell you is Camp Little Moose's darkest secret. A tale so terrifying, if your parents knew, they'd have never sent you here in the first place. Now, 50 years ago, right here at Little Moose, there was a counselor named Jerry McCready. The meanest counselor in the history of summer camp.
The scene is very reminiscent of the campfire scene in Friday the 13th, Part 2. The two stories told are of a person almost dying because children at a camp pulled a prank on him.
So, one day, the campers decided to play a little prank on old McCready. They put a snake in his day pack, and while Jerry was out hiking, he reached for his trail mix and got a handful of slithering serpent. McCready was so scared, he lost his footing and clean fell off Devil's Drop. Slid all the way down on his face, banging his head on every rock.
I don't want to scare anyone, but I'm going to give it to you straight about Jason. His body was never recovered from the lake after he drowned.
The victim somehow survives their close encounter with death.
What happened to him?
They never found the body.
And if you listen to the old-timers in town, they'll tell you he's still out there. Some sort of demented creature. Surviving in the wilderness. Full grown by now.
Concluding with the killer still out there, craving to murder.
But legend has it, the significant head trauma drove him insane. They call him the Woodsman.
Legend has it that Jason saw his mother beheaded that night. And he took his revenge. A revenge that he'll continue to seek if anyone ever enters his wilderness again.
With the end of the story, the killer jumps out from the shadows.
It's the woodsman!
And is revealed to be one of the camp counselors.
That was great, Daryl. You had him jumping higher than a tick on a trampoline.
All right, everybody. That's enough for tonight. Back to your cabins.
Hey, come back, come back! Oh.
our system, okay? I don't want to hear any more about it. It's ancient history. Jason drowned, Mrs. Voorhees was killed, and Camp Crystal Lake is off limits. You got it?
It's incredibly similar. After the kids are put to bed, the fire's put out, and the assistant counselor comes across the boathouse door, swinging back and forth, opening and closing. He walks over to close it and slowly realizes he's not alone. The woodsman readies his axe to strike, and we cut away to the assistant running and screaming. The boathouse explodes, and the lead counselor finds "Get Out" etched into the remaining wood. The woodsman throws his axe. Cut to opening credits. Now, this is how many a slasher opens, with an opening kill, except this is a Scooby-Doo movie. No corpses will be made in this picture. So this trope is slightly averted, but there are tropes that are fully averted. The death by sex trope, the dwindling party trope, the final girl trope, and the unlikable victims trope. The victims in this are the Scooby Gang, and it's hard to make the Scooby Gang unlikable.
Hey, I can look at myself naked.
Oh, brother.
I said hard, not impossible. Now, a lot of Scooby-Doo traditions are missing as well. Velma losing her glasses, Daphne falling into a booby trap, Scooby and Shaggy being bribed, but most prominently is Fred's trap is missing. The only instance we get Fred's trap is after the gang encounters the Fishman. Having enough of being terrorized, Fred leads the campers into setting up a trap. But they trap the wrong person. The real woodsman appears, causing everyone to run in different directions. We eventually come back to Fred, and the plan has changed.
So, what's the plan, Fred?
We hide here until he goes away.
That's your plan? That is so little, Moose.
I suppose you have a better one?
He realizes there is no plan. He realizes he has no control of the situation. No one can be when a man is trying to take your head, just like in other slasher movies. You have a plan? Well, now you don't. It will come crashing around you until either the villain's defeated or you are. But enough about the woodsman for now. Let's go over the film's other prominent villain, the Fishman. This comes to no surprise, but the Fishman's origin is also very similar to Jason's origin from Friday the 13th. So while the woodsman has some of the other parts of the origin, the Fishman carries the rest. The Fishman was once a boy at Camp Big Moose. He was neglected by other children. So he spent his time in the lake, and it transformed him over time into the Fishman. He now is an underwater threat to anyone who dares enter Camp Big Moose's lake. Jason from Friday the 13th was pushed in the lake by a bunch of kids due to neglect and was changed by the experience. He almost drowned and began to live in the woods. Now, that's how he was changed emotionally. If you take the Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash comic as canon, or the words of Jason Goes to Hell's director as canon, Jason is a deadite after Pamela Voorhees uses the Necronomicon. So in either origin, Jason is changed either physically or mentally by the lake experience. So in conclusion to this lengthy Friday the 13th chat, Jason and the Fishman were physically and mentally changed. So moving on, the Fishman's best scene is probably the second encounter where Daphne and Fred are looking for underwater clues. The Fishman attacks with the ferocity of a shark or crocodile, trying to drag the divers into the watery depths to drown. They barely make it out alive. So yeah, this is quite intense for a Scooby-Doo film. Every encounter with a monster isn't played for laughs most of the time. They're barely surviving these creatures. The danger is present at all times with each encounter. Another thing I must mention is the music in this film, replacing the usual music from past installments with a chilling and mysterious score. It's fitting in every scene, whether it be a tense scene or a scene that allows the audience to just take in the moment. The film's not always a desperate act of survival or a fun scene with Scooby and Shaggy. There are scenes with no speaking, where characters reflect on what's happening, incorporating beautiful music with beautiful visuals. That's surprising for this franchise. So why do I care about this movie? Well, to be honest, it's a good horror film. Is it terrifying? No. But it's a spooky film and a great tribute to films of the genre. The final scene of The Woodsman is a PG version of Michael Myers' Fall and Halloween.
We got the woodsman. He's
Gone.
The Camp City owner seems to be modeled after Crazy Ralph from the Friday the 13th films. The production team had a love for horror, and it shows. There's also just not a lot of animated horror out there. Sure, there's Coraline, Netflix's Castlevania, Junji Ito anime, the occasional tie-in to a scary video game, and the obscure animated films like Fears of the Dark, but there's not much. And it's not always going to be a good film either, so the odds are slim compared to live-action horror. You could play a horror video game, but that doesn't have the same vibe as a horror film does. There's also animation in the form of VFX in horror films, but still they feel too grounded. The CGI used in some horror films isn't free to be its own thing. Their actions are dictated by how the live action elements interact with them. Animation, on the other hand, is free to act and move however they want it. They just need the talent and the money to do so. Imagine what disturbing and terrifying things can be created with such a diverse art form. The fact that the Scooby-Doo team had the intention to make a film to chill your spine is an accomplishment in my eyes. If WB Animation had the guts to do this, then what excuse do other animation studios have?